Imagine for a second that you're standing in front of a house, not a mansion, not a penthouse, just a basic 3-bedroom brick house in the suburbs. It has a garage that smells like mildew, a backyard the size of a parking spot, and a kitchen that was last renovated when Nirvana was still together. The paint is peeling, the carpet is beige and probably haunted. This house is 40 kilometers from the city centre, which means you'll spend 2 hours a day in traffic breathing exhaust fumes. The real estate agent, who's wearing too much cologne and a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, leans in and whispers the price. $1.2 million. Australian dollars, but still. You laugh. He doesn't. You stop laughing. He tells you there are 14 other bidders, and the auction is on Saturday. You look at your bank account. You have $80,000 saved. You've been saving for 7 years. You don't drink, you don't travel, you eat toast for dinner, and you're not even close. Welcome to Australia, the lucky country, where the sun always shines, the beaches are pristine, and an entire generation has been economically exiled from the concept of home ownership. This isn't just a housing crisis. This is a multi-generational wealth transfer, a ticking mortgage time bomb, and a social experiment in how much pain a population can endure before it snaps. Today we're going deep into the nightmare. We're going to look at why Australia's housing problem makes Canada look like a practice round. We're going to talk about negative gearing, interest-only loans, foreign buyers, and a central bank that might have just lit the fuse on the biggest financial disaster since 2008. Buckle up. This is going to hurt. 1. The median madness. When normal became impossible. Let's start with a number that should make your stomach turn. The median house price in Sydney is roughly 1.4 million Australian dollars. That's about 900,000 US dollars. Melbourne, 1 million Australian dollars. Brisbane, which used to be the affordable option, just hit 850,000. Now let's talk about wages. The median household income in Australia is about 100,000 Australian dollars. Do the math. That's a house price to income ratio of 14 to 1 in Sydney. 14 times your annual income. For context, a healthy ratio, the kind that allows people to actually, buy a house, is roughly 3 to 1 or 4 to 1. Let that sink in. Sydney's housing market is nearly 4 times more expensive relative to income than what economists consider sustainable. It's not just unaffordable, it's mathematically insane. But here's where it gets worse. Australia didn't just wake up one day and find itself in this mess. This was built, brick by brick, policy by policy. It was engineered by a generation of homeowners who discovered the greatest get-rich-quick scheme in human history. Buy a house, watch the government subsidize your investment, and then pull up the ladder behind you. Let's compare this to Canada, because everyone loves to complain about Toronto and Vancouver. Toronto's median house price is about 1.1 million Canadian dollars. Vancouver is 1.2 million Canadian dollars. Terrible, right? But here's the kicker. Canadian wages are higher. The median household income in Toronto is about 120,000 Canadian dollars. That's a ratio of roughly 9 to 1. Still bad, still unsustainable. But Australia's worse. Australia has achieved the impossible. They've made Canada's housing crisis look like a rookie mistake, and the weapon they used to do it has a name: negative gearing. 2. Negative gearing, the tax loophole that ate a country. Alright, let's talk about the single dumbest policy decision in modern Australian history. It's called negative gearing, and it's the reason your cousin who works in IT owns 4 investment properties while you're eating 2-minute noodles in a rental. Here's how it works. Let's say you buy an investment property. You rent it out. The rental income you receive is $30,000 a year, but your costs, mortgage interest, maintenance, property management fees, are $40,000 a year. You're losing $10,000 annually. You're negatively geared. In most countries, you'd look at that and think, wow, this is a terrible investment. I'm literally losing money. But in Australia, the government says, don't worry, mate. You can deduct that $10,000 loss from your taxable income. So if you're a high earner making $150,000 a year, you can reduce your taxable income to $140,000. You just saved yourself thousands in taxes. And here's the beautiful part for investors. You don't actually care if the property is profitable because you're not making money from rent. You're making money from capital gains. The house goes up in value by 10% a year, you sell it in 5 years, and you've made $200,000 tax-free at a 50% discount on capital gains tax. This is not a housing policy. This is a wealth generation machine for people who already have wealth. And it's been turbocharged by another policy, the capital gains tax discount. If you hold an investment property for more than 12 months and then sell it, you only pay tax on 50% of the profit. So if you make $200,000 selling your investment property, you only pay tax on $100,000. It's a gift, a direct subsidy from the government to property investors. Now, imagine you're a regular person trying to buy your first home. You're competing at auction against Dave, who already owns 3 properties and gets a tax break for buying a 4th. Dave has equity. Dave has a tax accountant. Dave has negative gearing. You have hope and a pre-approval letter. Who do you think wins? This policy has turned housing into a speculative asset class. It's not about shelter anymore. It's about leveraging debt to extract wealth from a tax system that rewards you for losing money. It's genius if you're already in the game. It's a nightmare if you're trying to get in. And here's the political problem. Roughly 2 million Australians, about 10% of the population, own investment properties. They vote. They donate to political parties. And every time a politician even whispers about reforming negative gearing, the real estate lobby loses their minds. They run ads. They scream about mum and dad investors. They warn of a housing crash that will destroy the economy. So the politicians blink. They back down. And the crisis gets worse. If you think negative gearing is insane, wait until you hear about what's happening with the loans themselves. 3. Interest-only loans. The financial grenade with a long fuse. Let's talk about the stupidest financial product of the 21st century. The interest-only loan. Here's how it works. You borrow $800,000 to buy a house. For the first 5 to 10 years, you only pay the interest on the loan. You don't pay down any of the principal. Your monthly payment is lower, which means you can borrow more money, which means you can buy a more expensive house. Sounds great, right? Here's the problem. At the end of that interest-only period, the loan converts to principal and interest. Your monthly payment doesn't just go up a little, it explodes. If you were paying $2,500 a month interest only, you're now paying $4,500 a month, maybe more. At the peak of the Australian housing boom, roughly 40% of all investor loans were interest only. Think about that. Millions of Australians borrowed money with no plan to actually pay it back. They were just gambling that the house would go up in value enough that they could sell it or refinance before the bill came due. This is not a mortgage. This is a time bomb with a timer. And guess what? The timer is going off. Right now. In 2024 and 2025, hundreds of thousands of these loans are hitting their principal and interest cliff. People who were comfortably paying $2,000 a month are now staring at $4,500. And that's before we talk about interest rates. In 2020, the Reserve Bank of Australia, the RBA, slashed interest rates to 0.1% to fight COVID. Mortgages were cheap. People borrowed like drunken sailors. The average Australian mortgage debt hit $600,000. That's the highest in the world relative to income. Then inflation hit. The RBA started jacking up rates from 0.1% to 4.35% in less than 2 years. That's one of the fastest rate hike cycles in modern history. And every time they raised rates, mortgage payments went up. Let's do some math. If you borrowed $800,000 at 2.5% interest, your monthly payment is about $3,200. If rates go to 6%, your payment jumps to $4,800. That's an extra $1,600 a month. That's $19,200 a year. For a median household making $100,000, that's a 20% pay cut. People are drowning. They can't sell because if they sell now, after rates have risen and prices have softened, they might be in negative equity. They owe more than the house is worth. They can't refinance because the banks won't lend to them anymore. They're trapped. This is the mortgage time bomb. And it's ticking louder every month. 4. The foreign buyer scapegoat, blaming the symptom, ignoring the disease. All right, let's address the elephant in the room. Or rather, the scapegoat. foreign buyers. If you've spent any time in Australia, you've heard the narrative. The Chinese are buying all the houses. That's why we can't afford anything. It's a convenient story. It's emotionally satisfying. It's also mostly wrong. Don't get me wrong. Foreign investment in Australian property was significant during the 2010s. Wealthy buyers from China, Hong Kong and Singapore were absolutely snapping up apartments in Sydney and Melbourne. But here's the data. At the peak, foreign buyers accounted for roughly 10 to 15% of new housing supply. That's a lot, but it's not the majority. The real problem isn't foreign buyers, it's domestic investors. The Australian Tax Office data shows that Australian citizens and residents own roughly 2.3 million investment properties. That's not foreigners. That's your neighbours. That's Bob from accounting, who owns 3 townhouses in Brisbane, because negative gearing made it profitable to lose money. But blaming foreigners is easier than blaming Bob. It's politically safer. So the government introduced foreign buyer taxes, restrictions and reporting requirements. And you know what happened? Foreign buying dropped. But house prices kept rising because the structural problem, negative gearing, low supply, speculative investment, was never addressed. This is the classic mistake, treating the symptom instead of the disease. Foreign buyers were a symptom of a market so overheated that even people 8,000 kilometers away could smell the profit. But the disease was a tax system that turned housing into a casino. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you removed every single foreign buyer from the market tomorrow, prices would barely budge, because the real demand is coming from Australians leveraging themselves to the eyeballs to buy their second, third and fourth properties. But sure, let's keep blaming the foreigners. It makes for great headlines. 5. The supply lie. We can't build our way out. Whenever you point out that Australian housing is a disaster, someone always says the same thing. We just need to build more houses. It's a supply problem. And look, they're not entirely wrong. Australia does have a supply problem. Population growth has been fast, immigration has been high, and construction hasn't kept up. But here's the thing. Supply is only half the equation. If you flood the market with new houses but you still have negative gearing, incentivizing investors to buy them, you haven't solved the problem. You've just created more investment properties. Let's look at the data. Australia builds roughly 150,000 to 180,000 new homes a year. That sounds like a lot until you realise that population growth is adding 400,000 to 500,000 people annually. You're building houses for 180,000 people and adding 500,000 people. The math doesn't work. But even if you could magically build 500,000 houses a year, who would buy them? First home buyers or investors with negative gearing? The answer is investors. Every time. Because they have equity, tax breaks, and access to cheap credit. Here's a statistic that should make you angry. In 2021, at the peak of the boom, first home buyers made up only 25% of all purchases. Investors made up 35%. Let that sink in. Investors, people who already own property, were buying more houses than first-time buyers. This is a rigged game, and building more houses without changing the rules just means more houses for investors to gobble up. There's also the NIMBY problem. Not in my backyard. Every time a developer tries to build high-density housing, apartments, townhouses, the existing homeowners in the area lose their minds. They say it will ruin the character of the neighbourhood or cause traffic. What they really mean is, building more housing will increase supply, and that might lower my property value. Local councils, dominated by older homeowners, block development at every turn. They demand heritage protections for houses built in 1987. They require extensive environmental reviews for a duplex. They strangle supply in the name of preserving amenity. It's economic protectionism, and it's killing the country. 6. The RBA's impossible choice: crash the economy or crash the housing market. Let's talk about the Reserve Bank of Australia. They're in an impossible position, and they know it. Here's the problem. Inflation is high. Core inflation in Australia is running at about 4 to 5%. The RBA's target is 2 to 3%. To get inflation down, they need to keep interest rates high. High rates cool the economy. They reduce spending. They kill demand. But here's the catch. The Australian economy is built on housing. Roughly 60% of household wealth in Australia is tied up in property. If house prices crash, household wealth evaporates. People feel poorer, they stop spending. The economy tanks. So the RBA has two options. Keep rates high to fight inflation, which might crash the housing market and trigger a recession. Or cut rates to save the housing market, which lets inflation run wild and destroys people's purchasing power. It's a lose-lose scenario. And the reason they're in this position is because they let the housing bubble inflate for 20 years without ever popping it. During COVID, the RBA explicitly told people rates will stay low until 2024. People believed them. They locked in massive mortgages at 2% thinking they had years to pay it off. Then inflation hit and the RBA broke their promise. They jacked up rates faster than anyone expected. And now millions of households are in financial distress. The RBA is terrified of mortgage defaults. If people start defaulting en masse, the banks are in trouble. And if the banks are in trouble, the entire economy collapses. So they're trying to thread the needle. Keep rates high enough to fight inflation, but not so high that the housing market implodes. Good luck with that. Here's the scary part. The longer they wait to deal with this, the worse it gets. Every month that passes, more people are taking on more debt. More interest-only loans are converting. More households are reaching the breaking point. The time bomb isn't ticking anymore. It's beeping. 7. The rental nightmare. Can't buy, can't rent, can't win. Let's say you've accepted reality. You're never going to own a house. Fine. You'll rent. Except, surprise, the rental market is also a hellscape. Australia's rental vacancy rate is currently sitting at about 1%. That means for every 100 rental properties, only one is available. Anything below 3% is considered a crisis. We're at 1. What does this look like in practice? You show up to a rental inspection. There are 40 other people there. You're all standing in a tiny apartment that smells like mold and desperation. The kitchen has 2 burners. The bathroom has black mold growing in the grout. The landlord wants $600 a week. You fill out an application. You attach 6 months of payslips, a reference from your employer, your credit score, a blood sample, and a signed confession that you'll never own pets. You offer 3 months rent up front. You still don't get it. Why? Because someone else offered 6 months up front. This is the rental market. It's a bidding war for the privilege of paying someone else's mortgage. And the landlords know it. They raise rent by $50, $100, $150 a week, and you have no choice but to pay it, because the alternative is homelessness. Rent in Sydney is averaging $700 a week for a 2-bedroom apartment. That's $3,000 a month. If you're making the median income of $100,000, that's over half your post-tax income going to rent. You're 1 car breakdown away from financial ruin. And here's the kicker. You can't save for a house deposit because rent is eating all your money. It's a trap. A perfectly designed economic prison where you work full-time, pay someone else's mortgage, and die having built zero wealth. The landlords, meanwhile, are claiming that $3,000 monthly rent as income, deducting their mortgage interest and maintenance costs, and paying almost no tax because of negative gearing. They're building wealth. You're building nothing. It's a feudal system with extra steps. 8. The generational wealth gap, the lucky country for some. Let's talk about the elephant in every Australian living room, the generational divide. If you were born before 1970, you live in a different country than someone born after 1990. If you're a boomer, you bought your house in the 1980s for $80,000. You paid it off in 15 years while raising 3 kids on a single income. That house is now worth $1.5 million. You didn't do anything special, you just existed, while the government inflated the value of your asset. You're a millionaire on paper. Congratulations. If you're a millennial or Gen Z, you're paying $600 a week in rent, making the same real wage your parents made in 1990, and watching house prices rise faster than you can save. You did everything right. You went to university. You got a job. You don't eat avocado toast, despite what the boomer columnists say. And you're still locked out. This is creating a toxic resentment. The older generation looks at the young and says, "You're just not working hard enough. We did it. Why can't you?" The young generation looks at the old and says, "You rigged the game and pulled up the ladder." Both are partially right. The boomers did work hard, but they also benefited from policies that don't exist anymore. Free university, affordable housing, wage growth, the social contract that said, if you work hard, you'll own a home. That contract is dead, and the wealth gap is obscene. Australian households over 55 own roughly 65% of the nation's wealth. Households under 35 own less than 5%. It's the most unequal distribution of wealth by age in the developed world. This has political consequences. The young are radicalizing. Not in a violent way, but ideologically. They're rejecting the system. They're not having kids because they can't afford them. They're not buying cars. They're not investing in the economy. They're quiet, quitting life itself because the game is rigged. And the boomers? They're voting to protect their property values. They vote against zoning reform, against higher taxes on investment properties, against anything that might decrease the value of their house. Because that house isn't just their home, it's their retirement fund. So you have a democracy where one generation is voting to economically destroy the next. And the scary part? It's working. 9. The breaking point. What happens when the bomb goes off? So what happens now? What does the end game look like? There are really only 3 scenarios, and none of them are pretty. Scenario 1. The slow bleed. Prices stay high, rates stay high, and an entire generation is permanently locked out of home ownership. Australia becomes a renter nation. Wealth concentrates in the hands of property investors and foreign funds. The social fabric tears. Crime rises, birth rates collapse. The country becomes a beautiful, sunny dystopia where only the rich can afford shelter. This is the most likely scenario because it's the path of least resistance. Politicians don't have to do anything. The system just grinds on, slowly crushing the young. Scenario 2. The crash. Interest rates stay high long enough that people start defaulting on their mortgages. Forced sales flood the market. Prices drop 30%, 40%, maybe 50%. Banks take massive losses. The economy enters a depression. Unemployment spikes. But on the other side, housing becomes affordable again. First home buyers can finally enter the market. The reset is brutal, but necessary. This is the scenario economists whisper about, but politicians are terrified of. Because if you crash the housing market, you lose the election. Scenario 3. The intervention. The government finally acts. They abolish negative gearing. They tax vacant properties. They flood the market with public housing. They restrict investors. They prioritize first home buyers. Prices stabilize or drop slightly. The market becomes functional again. This is the least likely scenario, because it requires political courage that doesn't exist. Right now, we're in scenario 1, the slow bleed, and the longer it goes on, the closer we get to scenario 2. Because markets don't stay irrational forever. Eventually, the math catches up, and when it does, the explosion is going to be spectacular. I want you to think about this. Australia has one of the highest household debt-to-income ratios in the world, higher than the US before 2008, higher than Spain before their collapse. The only thing holding the system together is the belief that house prices will always go up. But belief isn't math. And math always wins. 10. The political paralysis. Why nothing will change. So if the problem is so obvious, why doesn't the government fix it? Simple. Because the people who benefit from the crisis are the ones who vote. Homeowners outnumber renters. Investors outnumber first-home buyers. Older voters turn out in higher numbers than young voters. If you're a politician, the math is clear. Protect the housing market or lose your seat. Every election cycle, politicians promise to fix housing. They announce first-home buyer grants, which just inflate prices further. They promise to build more houses, but they never reform the zoning laws that prevent construction. They talk about affordability, but they refuse to touch negative gearing because the real estate lobby will destroy them. It's theatre, and everyone knows it. The young have lost faith in the system. They don't believe politicians will ever fix it. And honestly, they're right. The only way this changes is if the pain becomes so widespread that it affects the voting base that matters. When the middle-aged homeowners start seeing their own kids unable to move out at 35, maybe they'll care. When defaults start hitting the suburbs and not just the margins, maybe they'll act. But by then, it might be too late. The bomb might have already gone off. So, what have we learned today? We've learned that Australia's housing crisis isn't an accident. It's a policy choice. It's the result of decades of treating housing as an investment vehicle instead of a human right. It's the product of negative gearing, interest-only loans, and a central bank that painted itself into a corner. We've learned that it's worse than Canada. The price-to-income ratios are higher, the debt levels are scarier, the political paralysis is deeper, and we've learned that there's no easy way out. Every solution involves pain. The only question is who feels it? The investors who made millions, or the young who never had a chance? To my Australian viewers, I see you. I know you're tired. I know you've been told to work harder, save more, stop complaining. But you're not the problem. The system is. And whether you stay and fight for reform or pack your bags and move to a country where you can actually afford to live, you're making the right choice for you. To everyone else watching, don't look away. Australia is the test case. They're showing you what happens when you let housing become a speculative asset, when you prioritise the wealth of the old over the future of the young, when you let a market run wild for 20 years without ever hitting the brakes. If you don't fix your own housing markets now, you'll be exactly where Australia is in 10 years, staring at a time bomb, hoping it doesn't go off on your watch. If this video made you angry, good, share it. If you're Australian and I got something wrong, tell me in the comments. If you've been personally destroyed by this crisis, tell your story. The algorithm likes engagement, and honestly, your pain deserves to be heard. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into economic disasters that are somehow still happening in real time. Hit the like button if you think negative gearing is the dumbest policy ever created. And hit the dislike button if you're a property investor who's mad I exposed your tax loophole. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna go look at rent prices and cry. See you in the next one.